You are listening to Intangiblia, the podcast of intangible law, plain talk about intellectual property. Please welcome your host, Leticia Caminero.
Hello from Washington, D.C. This is episode 3. Today we're going to learn about copyright for filmmaking and talk with a long-standing producer, director, and writer. Before we talk with our guest, the producer and director known for The Girl on the Edge, Off the Menu, and his latest film, Saving Paradise, let's talk about copyright for filmmaking. In episode 2, we already talked about copyright in general terms. Today, we will center on protecting audiovisual works. Who owns the film? The director, the producer, the writer, or the studio? Here are some things you need to know about copyright for filmmaking. The film is protected when created and fixed in a copy. Copyright registration is always encouraged to secure protection. In a film, the author can be either the director or producer or both. Many countries split these rights. In certain countries where moral rights are protected, the director enjoys the general moral rights over the film, the writer over the script, the designer over its design, and so on, while the producer takes all economic rights. It is also common to see that the producer is the one in charge of representing the other co-author's rights. Now, please remember that this structure is usually when moral rights are recognized for films. From episode 2, you may remember that moral rights are those eternal rights that provide recognition to the creator as an author or keep their anonymity and protect the integrity of the work. Of course, the allocation of rights can be agreed on a contract. It is not uncommon to see a producer holding all the economic rights related to the film. After all, they're often the ones who take all the financial risk. In some countries, there's also the structure of work made for hire, when someone is hired to create under an employment contract or a particular contract to create. In this case, the one who usually holds the rights is the person or company that hired the creator. Please make sure to understand your national law and any contract you will be signing. So now you know, copyright for filmmaking protects audiovisual works. Who owns the right? Depends on the contract and the laws. Let's learn from our guest about his journey of becoming a filmmaker.
Intangiblia, the podcast of intangible law, plain talk about intellectual property.
Today we had the great pleasure of talking with a multiple award-winning producer, director, and writer.
My name is Jay Silverman. I've been in the business since 1980. I was a photographer for most of my career and then evolved into shooting television commercials, and that evolved into shooting movies. And for the last 6 years, I've made 3 movies. One is called Girl on the Edge. That was produced by Sony. Another one is called Off the Menu. That's on Amazon. And I just finished a movie called Saving Paradise.
So you first started as a photographer. How was your journey of becoming a filmmaker, from photography up to making a film, producing and directing?
Well, I think, coming from photography, which is one picture tells a story, to moving pictures telling a story was not a difficult transition for me. I really loved what I do, and the outcome of it is for me to expand it into large format storytelling was a natural for me. It started with commercials, and then it turned into making full-length feature films. And I have a great passion to do independent movies.
And how are independent movies different from the studio films?
Well, independent movies it's a whole different field entirely, for reasons that relate to probably the simplest answer to that question is I'm dealing with making a movie with a small group of people. The decision makers are, in my case, self-financed, so I don't have to deal with the studio system, even though we make all of our movies with Screen Actors from SAG. we're still independent filmmakers. And it's just, what we can do with very little money is something that Hollywood cannot do. And I think we take a great deal of pride in putting a lot on the screen for, you just watched my last movie called Off the Menu, and that movie was made and produced for less than $1.5 million. There's really no Hollywood movies that are made even close. I think the cheapest Hollywood movie is made for $10 or $15 million, and those usually go direct to streaming.
So it's freedom, being an independent filmmaker.
I think it is. I think it's not just freedom. It's the idea that I can actually implement making a movie from scratch to conclusion on my own terms. And in being in the business of advertising and then commercials, there are so many decision makers, and there's so much emphasis on the process that an independent filmmaker really has an opportunity to tell a story and essentially come across as being, a one-sided story rather than a collaborative thing. I mean, I made a TV show about 8 years ago called The Cleaner that was on A&E, and that show was, essentially a collaboration between A&E, Paramount Pictures, and the creators of the show, which I was one of them. And it's a complicated deal because there's nothing you can do without going through just an immense amount of preparation and negotiating. You want to tell a story, you want to be a little edgy, and they don't want to be edgy. They want to be safe. I can go on and on. When you hear about filmmakers working for Netflix, one of the great joys they have is they're able to, predominantly wake up in the morning and make a movie without having people standing over their shoulders and telling them all the safe ways to make a film.
You do your own path in a way. You have your vision, and you can commit to it without being told what to do or not to do.
I think it's indicative to the writers of my last three movies. My first movie, Girl on the Edge, was written by a guy named Joey. And this guy won at the Sundance Film Festival with a movie called Blue Valentine. And then we used him in a way that gave him total freedom. And it was just me and him and my small little team here versus, an entire corporation is trying to mandate and fulfill so many categories that it becomes almost impossible to make, your creative statement.
Yes, of course. You cannot make everyone happy with one production. It's
Correct.
Virtually impossible. So talking of production, do you have a favorite one from all the ones that you have made over the years?
Well, I think my first movie and my last movie are my favorites. My first movie was a film about a young girl suffering from post-traumatic stress. And it was really important for me because part of her healing was done through equine therapy. So the movie kind of focuses on the treatment program and the essence of what it's like for parents that have these types of challenges come on to them, which is global. It's not just in the United States where a child gets involved in situations such as rape, such as drugs and alcohol, and they don't know what to do. And so, when I chose to make Girl on the Edge, one of my driving forces was to give back and show the fortune of a child recovering in treatment through a very, very unique, unusual way. And that's through equine therapy and a host of other things that the facility provided. I knew nothing about that. I make a joke about, it sounds like Ghostbusters, who are you going to call? But a parent that's sitting home, and trying to discover whom to call to help their own child is something that is global. we don't know what to do. You wake up one morning and all of a sudden you're stuck. You never were prepared to deal with the kind of challenges of a child that's suffering from post-traumatic stress. And in my last movie, which is a movie called Saving Paradise, that film, again, is very personal to me, because I think with the division of what's going on in the United States with politics and the global issues of trying to keep people employed in jobs that are meaningful, I came upon a script written by Van Bullitt that is called Penciltown, which we now call Saving Paradise. But that movie was very exciting for me, because it was about a small town that has a pencil factory, and the town relies on the pencil factory for employing them. And what ended up transpiring is the owner of the pencil factory ends up passing away and passing it on to his son. And all his son really understands and knows is to essentially take the property and sell it so he can move on. And he's convinced throughout the story, and very similar to It's a Wonderful Life, to try to, with the employees, work together to try to save the factory. And it was really exciting for me, because I could tell the story in many ways, and the way we chose to collaborate with the writer and actually make a story that we're all very proud of, turned out to be something, yet again, that's a give back from me as a filmmaker to the world, so they can see how a small town deals with this kind of tragedy and how they can overcome it.
Yeah, and it's something that is very current in these times. And how is your creative process that leads to making films or TV shows?
Well, my creative process is I've got two anchors working with me, a gentleman by the name of Joe and a woman named Bethany, and both work in tandem with myself, bringing me projects that are meaningful. And, they're looking for the next big thing. And in my case, the next big thing is something that kind of hits you viscerally, and makes you think. And especially during these, really unique times, small stories that have big ideas, I think are really desirable for an independent filmmaker.
Your movie that I just saw, Off the Menu, it's a very unique story, but also it's universal. The way that she feels passion for what she does, she's very eager to protect it as well. She has a heartbreak from a past relationship which doesn't let her heal or trust again. So all those things that we can all relate to, because we all have been heartbroken. We all try to pursue a passion in our lives, and it's always hard to trust after being mistreated in the past. So I can see that this type of ideas or stories are very moving because they tell something unique, but at the same way it's universal.
Well, that's what interests me about Off the Menu. From the moment I read the script, interestingly enough, for your viewers out there, we went to a script pitch down the street on Hollywood, on Santa Monica Boulevard. And there was, I think, perhaps 50, 100 writers pitching to companies like myself. And we heard the pitch, and we were intrigued, and we read the screenplay, and we all walked away going, I think this could be our next movie. And we spent a year developing the movie with the writer. And, one of the biggest challenges for a filmmaker when you begin this process is how can you tell the story better as a filmmaker than what's on a written page? How can you embellish it at a level that not only features a protagonist, but all the textural aspects surrounding it? And then, of course, the big question is, how can you afford to produce it? That takes a year or two to develop, because, instead of the character, I'm making this up right now, but instead of a character stepping into a Maserati and driving around town, he we may not be able to afford to get a Maserati, you know? And those types of things, and I'm being, spontaneous in my assessment, but they play a huge role. And another thing that plays a huge role is the feasibility of being able to produce a movie within 4 or 5 weeks on budget and with, people that are very talented, actors, producers, and all the, assortment of crew people that we bring on. So there's a lot of logistical things. And now, of course, you got COVID, which I haven't shot during COVID, but I own a stage here in Hollywood, and it's a big deal. I mean, these guys have an added pressure of trying to stay healthy and at the same time continue to produce work on a shorter day. It's extraordinary.
It's quite a large group of people that make one film. Even in independent films, you rely from technicians to the actors, to everyone behind, to directors, producers. So it's quite a large group of people all pushing towards the goal of making a film. Would you consider intellectual property part of your success or your business model as a filmmaker?
I think as a photographer and a filmmaker, it plays a huge role. It is the beginning and the end of having something that's meaningful to show for all your hard work.
So do you have any anecdotes or do you remember any experiences in dealing with IP, either copyright, trademark, licensing, royalties, anything that our audience can learn from?
Well, yeah, this is a really, really fascinating thing. Here I am in my 60s, and I'm telling you that since we all come home at night and watch TV, I'm watching a movie last night, and I see. Here's my analogy. Number one, affordability. When you wake up in the morning and you do an independent movie, you have these big, big eyes of thinking that you're going to, get a Rolling Stones song for the opening, and then you're going to close on a Ray Charles song. I mean, it's an incredibly simplistic category that's incredibly complex, because if you own a movie, and I don't know if you noticed this, but when you watch older movies, and I'm talking movies that are 10, 15, 20 years old that were big successes, most of them have different soundtracks now, because they do not want to pay into infinity royalties on all of these songs. And it never occurred to me until I made my last movie that there are so many young filmmakers that get involved in making films, and they think they got a great deal because they got a Beatles tune, which is phenomenal. But, the baggage that's connected to that annually in royalties is something that is going to displace your entire ability to make your money back. And I'm not even talking about making big money, but I'm talking about, in respect to royalties and ownership. When I do my movies, I own the rights to the film's music in perpetuity. And I don't do that because I'm a cheapskate. I do that because I'm looking into the future and I'm saying, how can we sustain this film in the marketplace without having to bring it back, recut it, and remix it, and re-put in new music that we can afford in 5 years? I don't want to get that bill for $500,000 after the first year of royalties come due, when I have to pay SAG, when I have to pay, IATSE. You start to get into scenarios where being smart enough to understand upfront that original music that you can own in perpetuity is going to make you safer in the future, rather than waking up one morning and all of a sudden getting a bill and not having any revenue to speak of that can pay for the music rights. And the same thing applies to licensing of pretty much anything in a movie. I would highly recommend that if you're going to buy B-roll, you buy it in perpetuity. You don't buy it as a one-off and then find out that every year you're going to be paying royalties on that image or that stock 7-second piece at the end of your movie. By the way, this applies to buying stock music. You can buy it in perpetuity or you can buy it for a specific use. I know a lot of filmmakers that go to market with a film that's got all these magnificent songs in it illegally. And, they're not worried about today. They're all they're thinking about is today, excuse me. They're not thinking about tomorrow, because when they go out and sell that movie, all those songs they can't afford.
You think about making decisions on a long term.
I mean, it's interesting. The reason this hit me in a strong manner in the last 3 or 4 months is I started to watch all these old films that were just filled with blockbuster music. And now they've got soundtracks that are obviously redone with quote unquote sound alike. And the movies just they're not as entertaining, I mean, I watched last night, Tom Cruise, I'm trying to think the movie where he's a pilot.
Top Gun.
Yeah. And I mean, Simpson and his partner were totally innovators at the time that movie came out, and just filling the movie up with, number one hits. And the outcome of it is that, who can afford that? And I was actually surprised that they retained all those songs when I watched it last night on Netflix. But they can afford it, An independent filmmaker, I don't know of any stories where they can afford it. It's a real separate divisional aspect. And if you're smart enough, you can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of money if you hire a composer that's willing to give you the rights in perpetuity for the movie. And in my case, I give him all the rights to the music after a period of time, sometimes 5 years, sometimes 3 years. And that doesn't mean I lose the perpetuity aspect, but he can sell it to TV shows and he can sell it for TV commercials, and which is what he's done, and doubled his money or tripled his money.
That's a great combination. So during the first period, you will do an exclusivity. So you're the only one available or authorized to use the music for a certain amount of years, and then he can profit from it.
Without sounding like a broken record, from my standpoint, it's a win-win for the filmmaker and the independent storyteller, and it's a win-win for the composer, because in my case, Dave Holden, who's done the music for all 3 of my movies, is reselling that music to I believe it's a music house in England, and he makes, quite a substantial amount of money off of these tracks that he cut for my movie.
He can profit from his work thanks to a good contract with you. Do you have any other experience with copyright or an anecdote that we can learn from?
Yeah, it's interesting. Just a brief note. I became very good friends with Ray Charles. You know who Ray Charles is.
Of course.
And I had a connection with Ray. And when he was alive, there was just an inordinate amount of for lack of a better word, contact that I could have, because I could just pick up the phone and call him. And, so I started developing a project, and the project was quite extensive, but it depended on his music. And all it took was an afternoon talking to his lawyer that it was absolutely an unsustainable objective, especially for an independent filmmaker. You're trying to make a project work financially, and you can't even get in the door because the costs of the copyright of both one side of the music and Ray Charles' voice, could cost you $50,000 right out the gate. In relationship to copyright and ownership is do what happened to me. I spent 1.5 years working on a Holocaust movie, and it turned out that the woman, who was in her late 80s, had sold the rights to a German production company, and neglected to tell me. And here I spent almost 1.5 years really developing the screenplay. And it broke my heart to find out that she could not pass, that she had no control over her own property, despite the fact that her agreement with this company had expired. her lawyer said it's a massive mess.
Sadly, that's what happens when you sign off your rights without understanding fully what you're signing or what you're giving up. On that note, what would you advise to new filmmakers, producers, directors, screenwriter, any other filmmaker creators out there? What would you tell them to do at the beginning of their career or in the first project? And what would you tell them not to do?
I think it's super important that you are realistic with your budget. All sorts of things are going to transpire that you never anticipated. And I think it's really, pre-production is everything, in my opinion. And that's why having a good producer is important. Having a good production designer is important. Somebody that knows how to work within a budget versus, they have an impressive reel and then you find out you can't afford any of the stuff they envisioned for your movie.
People with vision, but that can work within a budget with realistic vision in a way.
No, I'm just saying, to me, and I'm only saying this because I feel like you are interested in hearing me speak candidly and openly about the process. I'm saying to you that, many, many, many independent movies fail because of pre-production. They don't plan on things going wrong. They don't plan on things tying them up. They don't have experienced people going, boy, if we park our trucks on Melrose Avenue and we find ourselves, at the time of day that no one ever looked at the fact that you're not allowed to park on the street at that time of day. Just the time that it takes to move those trucks to another location is going to lose you an hour of production. And on an independent film, that's like stealing a day.
And after the movie is film, what is the next step? How do you make it possible to either go to the streaming platforms? Because I watched your movie on last night on Amazon Prime. Right. So how do you come to that decision to where you want to show your film?
That's a really profound question. When I finished my last movie, every movie that was being made after March of 2020 was put on hold. So I think there was nobody that would disagree with the fact that there was going to be a huge need for content, hopefully by Christmas, okay? And in my case, we had finished the movie literally one day before the pandemic started in Los Angeles. And what I learned was, and now here I am in October, having a challenging time finding a home for it, because all the movies that were finished, that were coming out in theaters for 2020, were now in competition with my little movie. And the people that were paying, substantial amount of money for those products were people like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, and Apple and so forth. So it's if you wanted to get your movie on Amazon right now, the likelihood is it's a transactional thing. If you wanted to get your movie on HBO, you got to sell it to HBO. And it's a tough deal because I've been lucky for my last 3 movies to have pre-sold it to HBO, pre-sold it to Showtime, pre-sold it to Sony. And this time around, the marketplace is entirely different than it was 3 years ago. So I'm struggling with trying to find a home for my movie in this marketplace right now, which means, to your question, what do I tell the new filmmaker? There are so many opportunities now with all the streaming services that we all know. I don't have to mention. The question is, you can hire an agent and put them in all those. You can have it screening on iTunes. You can have it screening on Amazon, and pay for it. You give them a piece of the action. But the problem is, how do you get eyeballs to watch your movie? You need advertising. You need marketing. You need social media. The marketplace today, in relationship to what it was 3 years ago, is entirely different. And my bet is if you look into the future, it's going to be even more different.
Yeah, so the trick is to evolve with the times, to find the new and best way to make your film known. It's not only putting it out there in a platform. You have to promote it. You have to pursue that people actually watch it or knows about it as well.
It's an exciting medium, but I had a young filmmaker call me up in the last a month and asked me if I would meet with him. And I gave him the same advice I give myself, is you take it out to these small independent either sales reps or companies that specialize in buying independent movies, and you pray to God they're going to be ethical and not rip you off. And that's what I told them, but this idea of winning a film festival and think that that's an invitation for you to sell your movie is a misdirect, because it really isn't. There in the good old days, if you got into Sundance and you got into Telluride and you got into these big festivals in New York and Canada, you will have buyers in those festivals. But now the competition is so immense that unless your film was praised and features celebrities, or it had something that broke through, it's a tough road. It's a very tough road for anybody. I mean, I've been doing it for 6-7 years now, and I'm prepared and lucky enough to say my movie Off the Menu is having a nice run, but it's going to be slow. My first movie, in respect to making back what I paid, is getting close, and that's a miracle in relationship to independent filmmaking.
So it's not only getting the awards in the festivals; it's about being smart on how you're gonna commercialize your film.
That's correct. I mean, look, I listen to NPR every day, and I listen to TED Talks, and I'm very intrigued. I mean, I just listened to a 1-hour podcast yesterday with a famous actor director, and then that night I watched the movie. That's what everybody prays for, that type. But if Ethan Hawke did, which is what I'm talking about, he did a movie and he has a TV show now on Showtime. You wake up in the morning and that publicity, that machine that creates conversation about his film, is the only way to get people to take their eyes and decide that's what they're going to watch tonight. And how many people listen to NPR? 5% of our adults, which is really not that many.
The trick is to keep trying, keep pushing. Well, yay! Thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to hear from you, learning from you as well. And I really hope you have the best of luck with your upcoming project.
Thank you.
And please let me know whenever something comes out, because now I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan. I'm going to watch the rest of the other film, They Get on the Edge, and the rest of them. So I'm very curious about how you tell the stories and how you focus the stories. It was very, at least from the one that I saw last night, Off the Menu, it's very unique, your eye through the story.
Thank you. Yeah, you can see that I was a photographer.
And I got so hungry as well watching that film.
Thank you very much.
There you have it. Thank you so much, Jay, for taking the time to answer our questions and giving us the advice to plan long-term, prepare your production within a realistic budget, and surround yourself with the right people. The magic of the film is in the result of the hard work of its creators. And for them to enjoy the fruits of their work, they must enjoy effective copyright protection. And so we come to the end of our episode. See you next Tuesday with a new guest and a new IP topic.
Thank you for listening to Intangiblia, the podcast of intangible law, plain talk about intellectual property. Did you like what we talked today? Please share with your network. Do you want to learn more about intellectual property? Subscribe now on your favorite podcast player. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Visit our website www.intangiblia.com. Copyright Leticia Caminero 2020. All rights reserved. This podcast is provided for information purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice or legal opinion.